To kick off 2025, I've compiled the biggest updates so far on the next Mass Effect. And on paper, those updates look very optimistic once it hits production. Let's dive into why the confirmed developers on the team, animation style, and choice of tone are setting up for the next game to be even better than the trilogy. First up, let's go over if Mass Effect's head honcho is telling the truth about Mass Effect running in the blood of his team. Let's start with the franchise director himself, Michael Gambel. Gambel joined BioWare in 2009 and worked on Mass Effect 2, 3, Andromeda, and the Legendary Edition. His veteran experience spans 16 years, and he's currently listed as the executive producer of the next Mass Effect, where he'd basically be in charge of scheduling and budgeting for his team, and making sure the game is up to a certain standard of quality. Gambel has worked on every Mass Effect except the first one, so the franchise definitely runs in his blood. But what about the rest of the confirmed leadership group? Sleuthing in Gambel's very old tweets from 5 years ago, he confirmed that Derek Watts, the original art director for Mass Effect, is also returning for the upcoming game. On LinkedIn, he's simply listed as an art director for BioWare, but I noticed in the credits for the Mass Effect board game that his official title might be the franchise art director, which would make him one of the main art leaders for the next Mass Effect. As a quick aside, because I'm highly aware of all the art takes about to drop in the comments, Gambel has gone on record that the next Mass Effect will be photorealistic as long as he's running it. We've also seen very early in-game footage of an N7 walking, which may or may not be Shepard, which has given us a small taste of the quality of photorealism we can expect in the next Mass Effect. This footage was most likely made in Unreal Engine 5, based on this Gambel tweet replying to potential improvements of the engine way back in 2023. Derek Watts has worked on every single Mass Effect that has ever launched, so it's safe to say he's familiar with Unreal Engine and that Mass Effect runs in his blood too. Now for this next staff member, I'm not entirely sure if they are confirmed, but I stumbled across their name in the Mass Effect board game credits, so I figure it's fair game to point them out. That name being Preston Wetamaniuk, who may be the upcoming game director for the next Mass Effect. With Casey Hudson's leave from BioWare in 2020 and Mac Walters leaving in 2023, it'll be pretty hard to fill the shoes of two of Mass Effect's biggest directors, but if anyone can do it, Preston probably could. Wetamaniuk has been with BioWare for 24 years and has worked on every Mass Effect game as the lead designer, so he's very familiar with executing on a game's overall vision. Mass Effect very clearly runs in Preston's blood, and if the board game's credits are accurate, he might helm the next Mass Effect as its new director. So that's the directing, producing, and art side of things. But what about the all-important leaders in the creative department? Once again, Gambel named one of those team members back in 2020. Parrish Lay was the cinematic director of the trilogy and worked on every Mass Effect game except for Andromeda. His role was basically to land some of the most cinematic moments that made us laugh, cry, and everything in between. As someone that missed those cinematic moments in Andromeda, his return to BioWare will definitely give the next Mass Effect a huge boost. In BioWare's N7 Day 2022 blog, Lay lists among his roles as making sure the Mass Effect saga stays true to the franchise's roots. Yep, Mass Effect definitely runs in Lay's blood too. These are the main leaders of the next Mass Effect, and they undoubtedly all have Mass Effect running through their veins. But honestly, it's not these team members that make me think the next Mass Effect is setting up to be a blockbuster. I'm way more excited about the fresh blood joining the Mass Effect team, starting with its incredibly talented and experienced senior narrative director, Mary DeMarle. When I first saw that Mary had joined the Mass Effect team, I thought it was a pretty solid hire, but it wasn't until I dove into all of her previous work that I realized the Mass Effect team had hit an out-of-the-park home run by snagging her for the team. DeMarle's resume is insane. She's an award-winning narrative director and writer for Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, and worked on sci-fi games like Deus Ex Revolution and storytelling masterpieces with the Myst series. She is essentially going to be the head of the writing team, but her role also goes way beyond that. DeMarle herself described her role as working with the writers and then using their developed stories to inform every other department, from the artists to the level designers and way more. In a nutshell, Mary will basically be in charge of player experience being completely immersive, from the codex to the ambient dialogue, and especially to the main plot. Damrall being in charge of such a large part of the next Mass Effect is why I don't have any concerns about what's commonly and wrongly clumped together and called BioWare's writing. And the best part of Damrall's hiring is that she herself said that joining the Mass Effect team is one of the highlights of her career. Even though she didn't join the team until 2022, she undoubtedly loves Mass Effect, deserves to be in her position, and will absolutely make the next Mass Effect better for being on the team. Now, as for the rest of the creative department, not much has been mentioned, but I did want to bring up one of the more talented hires BioWare has kept on the down low, and that's the storyteller analyst from Beyond the Screenplay, Michael Tucker. Tucker's video on the Mass Effect TV show having Game of Thrones potential is a must-watch, and I think that video is what caught the attention of the Mass Effect leadership team. His role on the team is currently unclear, but if I had to guess, I'd assume his exceptional analyses of stories would place him on the writing team. We'll have to wait and see where he lands, but the last wildcard member I wanted to mention who joined last year is Connie Booth. Booth joined EA as its senior vice president and group general manager for action RPGs, with IGN listing one of her main roles being the revitalization of BioWare. Her last position was with PlayStation, where she worked on blockbuster stories like Marvel's Spider-Man 1 and 2, The Last of Us, Ghost of Tsushima, and Uncharted, which are 5 really exceptional franchises. It's still unclear how exactly Booth will impact the next Mass Effect, so we're in a waiting game for now until her role is clarified by EA or BioWare. So those are all the currently known members of the Mass Effect team, which honestly on paper is looking like a really Mass Effect experienced group that has a ton of talent to boot. But obviously, this all comes with a huge asterisk. With layoffs being the norm, I have no idea if this core group will stick around until the end of the next Mass Effect's development. If they do, there's a huge chance that the next game is going to be blockbuster quality. So for now, if we assume this veteran group does stick together, are the rest of the Mass Effect 5 updates as optimistic? I'd say yeah. And I also think the rest of the updates give a little more juice to the Shepard returns theory, especially one Gamble tweet in particular. Before we get to that tweet though, just a quick heads up that I've revamped my Patreon to include super fun perks like Discord access to the server I share with Calla Elizabeth, and also hints about upcoming theory videos. If you love Mass Effect, want insight on my videos before they hit YouTube, or want guaranteed responses to your theories, which could even feature on the channel, then become a member of my Patreon to unlock all that and more. Alright, so what exactly did Gamble say that makes it more likely for Shepard to return? In this tweet, following a bunch of questions around the Veilguard's release, Gamble spoke up about the tone of the next Mass Effect. He emphasized that Mass Effect will maintain the mature tone of the original trilogy, without alluding to anything further. Now, when I first saw this, I was obviously really happy to hear the mature tone would be back, but after I looked over Gamble's statement a few times, I think it's more telling than I first thought. Gamble specifically used the word maintain the mature tone of the original trilogy, but last I checked, the previous game in the series, Andromeda, intentionally deviated from the mature tone. So why use the word maintain? Unless the next Mass Effect is going to directly pick up from the events of Mass Effect 3. To me, you don't use the word maintain while describing the trilogy if there's going to be a large time jump. Obviously, that's just my interpretation, but I do have 2 more pieces of evidence for the next game being a direct sequel to the events of Mass Effect 3. The first being one I've already shown, Parrish Leigh's return to the Mass Effect team. Out of all the leadership group, Leigh worked on the trilogy, but left BioWare before Andromeda's development, and now he's decided to rejoin the team. Did Leigh return because potentially Shepard is returning, and he rejoined the team to bring those Shepard-esque cinematics back for the next game? Obviously, we don't know the reason why he came back, but I find it very suspicious that not only did Leigh return after leaving BioWare, but another member of the team, Dusty Everman, also returned. As Gamble said, Dusty worked on the original Normandy, and evidently left BioWare only to return for the upcoming game. Gamble also specifically pointed out that there are more like Dusty who weren't with BioWare but who returned, specifically for the next Mass Effect. Why else would a large group of former employees who worked on the original Mass Effect return, if not because the main protagonist was returning as well? for potentially one more story. From all the teasers I've seen so far, I believe Shepard is going to return for the next game. And if they're gonna be back as the protagonist, it would almost guarantee BioWare a blockbuster success. The really fun part of all my unhinged theorizing though, is I think the team isn't only bringing Shepard back from the dead once, but twice. Yeah, it's absolutely insane, but I think there might be 2 Shepards in the next game. To find out which Shepard might be our original from the trilogy, watch this theory next. Happy New Year, y'all! I'll see you there.